Hey there, welcome to School of Emo, the podcast where we dive into the world of emo, pop punk, and everything in between. If you've ever found yourself in your car screaming the lyrics to Taking Back Sunday, wearing way too much eyeliner in the early 2000s, adding a buckle or a chain to every outfit you've put on, you are in the right place. I'm Erin Judge, and each week I will be your fellow student, guiding you through the music, the culture, and the history that shaped an entire generation of angsty teens. I am not the teacher of this school. I am a fellow student, here to learn alongside you and from you. Together, we will cover a lot of information that doesn't really matter, but will remind us of the days of stalking MySpace channels and getting lost in chat rooms. So connect your dial up, turn on your webcam, and let's go to School of Emo. School of Emo is back in session. We have another class that many of you have been waiting for. You have been asking for. I know that you've been thinking about if you have been listening to any of the podcasts, because this band has been really looked for and talked about, I think, a little bit more heavily over the last year. And one that I was only familiar with a few top songs. That's where we're into with some of the bands now. But I've gotten really excited about doing a deep dive on the band history, but also listening to some newer music. So if you haven't guessed it already, we are talking about the starting line. Now, before we get started, I know you may already be categorizing the starting line as pop punk. I would say they blend perfectly between emo and pop punk. We're going to talk about it. But this podcast is not just only emo. We also acknowledge that there are many different definitions of what is emo, what is not, how has that evolved, and does it matter if a definition exists compared to how we have collectively come together and celebrated this music that we all love. So if you're writing it off or you have that in your brain, then I want to challenge you to be open-minded and open up past the emo label, and let's talk about the scene, the culture as a whole, the early 2000s, and the music that made it great. And the starting line was a huge part of that. So we're going all the way back to 1999 in Churchville, Pennsylvania. So Northeast Coast. And teenager at the time, Kenny Vasoli, the lead vocals, the bass player, joined by, as the early lineup, Matt Watts on guitar, Mike Gola on guitar, and Tom Kriskevich on drums. So very quickly, when they started out their basement shows early on, they caught the attention of Drive Through Records, which was one of the most important labels in the early 2000s when it came to pop punk and emo, but especially the pop punk space. So they were a California-based independent label founded in 1996, so not too far along by the time they found this band. And they were founded by siblings Richard and Stephanie Reynes, that defined the early 2000s pop punk and emo sound. So they launched bands like New Found Glory, Dashboard Confessional, Taking Back Sunday, Something Corporate, Finch, Hello Goodbye, and The Starting Line. They became very quickly, like especially at the beginning of that boom of emo and pop punk in the early 2000s, they became known for their simple red logo with a yellow arrow. And as you may recall from some of our earlier conversations about what was going on in the early 2000s, like what actually led to bands like succeeding, and what bands how did music spread, right? Pre-social media, like what was happening. And yes, we had a little bit of online streaming. We had people taking like LimeWire and things like that, taking music. We had MySpace. We had MTV. We had some of these things pop up. But as all of that was being developed, one of the biggest ways that people made it was through their record labels. And even when we were all going to record stores and buying CDs to listen to new music because we couldn't really stream it, and even pre-iPod days where we would buy the music there, most people would look for the labels that they liked. And the labels they liked tended to assign other bands that had a similar sound. And so you would pick a label that you were really into based on one band you found. And that's usually how you found other bands until things expanded and music became a little bit more accessible. So being able to join this very tight knit family and identity of Drive Through Records was huge for the starting line, and very quickly placed them directly in the pipeline, which would lead them to become one of the more dominant sounds of the early 2000s scene, carrying on to their influence in their space today. Thankfully, they did not take that chance for granted because in 2002, they released their debut full length album, Say It Like You Mean It. This album is pure pop punk meets emo perfection. This album could be so clearly defined as emo while also being clearly defined as pop punk, which I think is so special, but kind of encapsulates, I think, the blend we were starting to see in the Warped Tour world and these bands and these two different scenes coming together. But it had fast tempos, huge choruses, lyrics that felt ripped straight from a teenager's journal, very emo. And this album came with such big hits: The Best of Me, Leaving, Almost There, Going Nowhere. So many critics praised this album for its sincerity, also noting that while it followed these kind of pop punk conventions at the time, it stood out because it felt real. It had that emo underground to it with like the pop punk sound that was a lot more accessible at this stage in the early 2000 wave. And from a lot of fan perspectives, looking through Reddit threads and fan, overviews, a lot of people will say that this album just takes them straight back to high school. This was teenage in a bottle and encapsulated so much of what they were feeling and experiencing, which music at that time, and I'm sure it does today for teenagers today, I just can't relate to that. It was able to capture that so beautifully, especially within the emo pop punk world. So it led to the genre debate. Are they emo or are they just emotional pop punk? And that question would follow the band for their entire career. It's still debated today. Does it need to be? I don't think so. But let's look at the lyrics of this first album. And as you hear the lyrics outside of the sound, how do you separate emo from pop punk? Like, does that even exist when you tie so closely to the lyrics more than just maybe the sound or the genre that was slapped on the band at the beginning? So, starting with Best of Me. Tell me what you thought about when you were gone and so alone. The worst is over. You can have the best of me. We got older, but we're still young. We never grew out of this feeling that we won't give up. Here we lay again on two separate beds, writing phone lines to meet a familiar voice, and pictures drawn from memory. We reflect on miscommunications and misunderstandings and missing each other too much to have had to let go. We turn our music down and we whisper, say what you're thinking right now. Tell me what you thought about when you were gone and so alone. The worst is over. You can have the best of me. We got older, but we're still young. We never grew out of this feeling that we won't give up. Jumping to conclusions made me fall away from you. I'm so glad that the truth has brought back together me and you. So, with this album and success, as well as the backing of Drive-Thru Records, the early 2000s, the starting line became a staple of the scene. They toured relentlessly, they built a very devoted fan base, and they shared stages with bands like Good Charlotte, Simple Plan, All Time Low, some of these bands that were at the height of this period of time in the early 2000s music scene. They weren't the heaviest band that was out there. They weren't the most theatrical band that was out there, but they were consistent and they were able to deliver songs that fans could scream along to night after night, which, as we've discussed with bands like Dashboard Confessionals and these early emo bands, was so needed and welcomed and something that people were hungry for. That was very much a right place, right time period for these bands and for the starting line. So then in 2005, after all the touring, all the momentum, they released their sophomore album based on a true story. This album marked their first big shift in their sound. They slowed their tempos down, they became more introspective. Their lyrics addressed a little bit more of what was happening in the music industry, into label pressure that they were experiencing, and their own frustrations. So, more honest and vulnerable. Like a lot of these bands, right? You take someone who wrote very much a teenage experience to now being thrust into the spotlight and being treated a little bit more like an adult, whether they are truly adults or mature or not. But you're dealing with different struggles. And so the music tends to follow that unless you stick to like maybe jokes or a different style. And so they were able to lean into that. And that also left them, or what was also happening behind the scenes with all of this is that Drive Through Records was having their own issues with different labels, and the band kind of clashed a bit with that label. And so they ended up signing with Geffen Records, and that experience wasn't really great. Later on, Kenny expressed that there was a lot of frustration with a lack of creative control and promotional support from this label. So they went from having a very kind of small independent label, great reputation, great connections, pushing them forward, to a label that was not necessarily doing that. And all of the pressure, again, we talked about the positives of labels at the time. The negatives is that a lot of bands were put under contracts that were really messy, and they were held to huge standards, especially if they came out really strong with their first album. And it's hard to keep up that level of success again and again and again, especially now as other bands are on the scene and there's more competition. And again, music is exploding and becoming accessible, so it looks different than it ever had. And that's a lot of pressure for a band to be under. So Kenny quoted as he was interviewed later, he said, "It felt like we were fighting to be heard even by our own label." And by fans and critics alike, people were pretty divided on this album. Some people really loved the maturity and the honesty that was there. Others missed the energy of their first album and made comments like, this is not what I fell in love with. This is not what I wanted. I love this album. I think I like the slower, more melodic, I think more honest beyond the teenage experience. I think it's something maybe I connect a little bit more to now. And I love the songs on this album and some that followed that were more like this versus some of the albums that are a little bit faster, but they're all good in their own right. One song that really sticks out, kind of the biggest song of this album, is Bedroom Talk. So those lyrics. I got the talk when I was younger and understood. As I recall, they hadn't mentioned this at all. My heart was racing like a sprinter that tripped and fell, in love with a girl just for tonight, and that's all. And they've got to mean something more than just once. But I just don't know what I want. I'm gonna tear your ass up like we just got married, and you're all mine now. Tonight is the night we've been waiting for all our lives, or maybe for just tonight. I got the call when I was older. Yeah, and I understood. If it happens, then it happens, and that's all. My arms, the hose, and you're the fire, out of control. And I've got to put you out before there's nothing left at all. I've got big, big plans, and they've got to mean something more than just once. But I just don't know what I want. I'm going to tear your ass up like we just got married, and you're all mine now. Tonight is the night we've been waiting for all our lives, or maybe for just mine. Get your ass up because you're in no hurry like I am now. I'm getting older and older all of the time, or maybe for just tonight. And the next part is the hardest to admit and explain, but I've got to get it right. She said, I'll chew you up and spit you out like all them. I'm going to put you right back in my mouth. You know that I will always love you. So in 2007, the Starting Line released their third album called Direction. This leaned further into more of an alternative rock sound with more layered production and still that introspective songwriting that they were known for. And a lot of bands were doing this at the time. They were, this is when the third wave of emo and like that height was starting to kind of come down a little bit and go down, not fully by this point, but getting a little bit closer to that. And so it was not uncommon that bands would experiment with this style and kind of lean more into this. This is what was now becoming a bit more popular, was being played more, the radio part of it all, like that made a difference. And so a lot of bands were leaning into that, including the Starting Line with the album Direction. And fans were mixed, of course, on this album about, it veering even further away from what they originally loved and like what they had leaned into the band for, and like especially what they got from at the very beginning. And so while it may have opened the door for some of the newer fans, it also kind of closed the door for some, or just isolated a few and led to an album being maybe not so much of their favorite. So one big takeaway song or a big song here that I actually have saved on my one of my happy playlists is Island. So looking at those lyrics, let's sail away, find our own country. We'll build a house and beds out of palm trees. Let's get away, let's push our lives aside. I'll sport a smile, take in some color. Under the stars, I'll be your lover. With no distractions, I'm gonna treat you right. Well, it seems like things are only getting better. Well, it seems like we can never catch a break. Just keep a hold on me, don't let go. If you float away, if you float away, waiting too long for a ship to come, don't you float away, don't you float away. Let's go to bed, let's stop debating. Look at the time, we're always waiting, but we're in love, and that should be just fine. Well, it seems like things are only getting better. Well, it seems like we can never catch a break. Just keep a hold on me, don't let go. If you float away, if you float away. Waiting too long for a ship to come, don't you float away, don't you float away. And if you like, and if you like some other time, I would like to introduce you to the finer things. If we survive, if we survive, get out alive. I'd like to say how beautiful I think you are. And if you like some other time, I would like to introduce you to the finer things. If we survive, if we survived, get out alive, I'd like to say how beautiful I think you are. Just keep a hold on me, don't let go. If you float away, if you float away. Waiting too long for a ship to come, don't you float away, don't you float away. So while the band was experimenting and it seemed like they were really leaning into more creativity with the release of this album and they saw some success, it wasn't a failure. They did choose to step away pretty soon after, citing just exhaustion from years of touring, industry pressure. Again, what a lot of bands were doing as they entered kind of these early into the 2010s. And so they took a bit of a break, and many of the band members had their own creative outlets. Kenny, notably, was part of a Vacationer, which was a more laid back indie pop project that showcased a completely different side of his songwriting. He also played in Person L, and it really helped him because it highlighted that he wasn't just a pop punk frontman. He was a bit more versatile and could evolve beyond the scene. But they that doesn't mean that they never came back together because during their break they did release a few live albums, but then they made their major comeback in September of 2025, not that long ago, like 6 months ago, 7 8 months ago. And they released their first studio album in 18 years called Eternal Youth, which was released on September 26 2025. What made it special is that they did bring the original lineup back together. So they had Kenny, Matt Watts, Mike Gola, and Tom on drums. They also had Brian Schmutz, who reunited and was part of the band throughout different eras. And they released it on their own label, Lineage Recordings. So starting a new era with a fresh start, maybe on their own terms. Hopefully, this means some longevity. Maybe it's just short term. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But with releasing the new music and the new music being like interesting, right? It's not just a re-record of their first album. It goes back and like I feel like it's such a good blend of a lot of their albums. It's definitely faster, louder than maybe some of their slower introspective work. It does have more of that pop punk feel to it than even looking at the like with Island, right? That's a little bit more poppy. It has more of that punk undertone to like the sound itself. And so it brought back a lot of this kind of 2000s era pop punk nostalgia, balanced with more maturity from the band themselves and the songwriting, which was perfectly placed for their fans that are older, more mature, and like a great way to kind of return to the scene. And it's exciting because maybe it is just a simple project they put together, who knows? Or maybe this is a start of like a new era completely. Maybe this is, they're coming back together, they're reignited in their creativity and their love for this band, and it's going to get its biggest like second wave and maybe even see more success than it did before. Like we're seeing with so many bands who've come back to the scene and have really leaned in to what their new sound will be and who their fans are now in their growth and how they've matured. So looking at fan response, most fans have been very positive, considering it this kind of premiere comeback, a reflection of what they loved at the beginning. Critics have praised the authentic energy, some calling it a phenomenal second chance that avoids being simple nostalgia bait. I think it's a great way to describe it. It feels familiar, but it is fresh, it is new. It's not just a complete copy of something that they've already done. So on the album, the best streaming song so far is Circulate. The lyrics look kind of funny to read compared to how the music sounds. I really like the song, but it's also going to be kind of interesting to read. So I'm going to do my best. Hey, no dancing to the DJ. They won't put down their phones. This lot on some kind of mission. Some people cannot be left alone. Murphy's Law in the next room. Open with quest for herb. Now everybody's moving. Matt Gray still knows every word by heart. Slow burn, billowing. Your turn. Meet me at the front. Rotation, circulate, cloud burst. Right before it's done. Slow burn, billowing, your turn, meet me at the front. Rotation, circulate, cloud burst right before it's done. Post show throw on transmission, tempo is taking hold. Maybe I should write it down. To say no one wrote a song as good as Love Will Tear Us Apart, cultural demolition, nothing was set in stone. Never was set in stone. In the midst of repetition, subtle changes managed to occur. Slow burn, billowing, your turn, meet me at the front. Rotation, circulate, cloud burst right before it's done. Starting to permeate a shifting paradigm and always taking place in a race against time. I wouldn't hesitate, the work is never done, in a continuous race against time. So, with the reunion and the comeback, they have launched a tour. They started touring in 2025, and then they've been announced on the 2026 Vans Warped Tour lineup. Maybe they'll be on the Emos Not Dead cruise. I just have like an inkling, I think, after learning a little bit about their comeback and hearing people so excited about the comeback and like referencing their old music, but seeing kind of a welcome, open arms, like thirst for their sound now. I think it's really interesting. So maybe we'll see them there. And I think them having their original lineup really helps. It's like it's so much nostalgia meets something fresh and new, which again I think is the perfect combination of what people really want. A lot of us millennials, as we are stuck inside the world we love in terms of our music, but also want to keep getting something new and experiencing something new and taking as much as we can from it all. So they are touring, and it's not like they weren't touring at all. They did some pop-up shows, but it's not like they completely disappeared. But if you are a fan, now they're a little bit more available and their shows may have a little bit more to them. And there's a little bit of fresh energy involved, which we know makes a band so much more fun to watch and shows to be a part of. So very, very exciting. So with all of that and their history, where do they fit in when we think about emo history? As I started with, I think that they are one of the bands that is perfectly between kind of bridging the gap between that upbeat pop punk and then emotionally driven emo. They were right in the middle of that, bridging it together, showing where a lot of bands truly fit in these scenes. And whether you are the diehard emo that's still stuck in the second wave and you refuse to acknowledge mainstream success and non DIY bands, and so pop punk is completely out of the question for you, like you can't deny that what culturally has been accepted and like what, if we think about where the money goes and even how these labels have held up over time, like they are the bridge, they are the gap, they are part of both in their own way. And even when we think about Say It Like You Mean It, I think even though its truth is defined as a pop punk band and album, it is a defining emo album of the early 2000s. Many people will point to that album as being purely emo when we think about the third wave of emo in the 2000s. So we can't deny that that is true, and agreed upon by so many people. If you don't agree, let me know. I mean, talk about it in the YouTube comments. You can talk to other people. If you do agree, also share. If you have a favorite story about the band or something that you're excited about with their return, or you think maybe a song you think is kind of overlooked in overshadowed by some of these that are more of their hits or heavily streamed. Share it, because that's how we learn and get excited about these bands, and hopefully some shows that we'll all get to see in the future. I hope you enjoyed today's class. Your homework is to go, we're going to bookend. I want you to go to listen to Say It Like You Mean It. And then after you listen to that album fully, maybe twice through, then I want you to go to the newest album, Eternal Youth. Compare the two. What feels familiar? Where can you pinpoint the maturity? How do you, even the sound, the voice, like just compare the two and see what you think. Do you like what is coming now? Do you feel like the beginning is where you want to stay and that's the music that you love the most? And if you are fascinated by the comparison of those two albums, then fill in the gaps in between and listen to the different eras of sound from this band. Thankfully, they have put out music that kind of keeps you interested because they've shifted and changed their sound a little over time with each release that they've had. That's your homework. Go do it. And I will see you in our next class.